Thank you very much, all of you, for attending this meeting. I was asked to facilitate this engagement, and I believe that all who are present today were sent an email indicating what we're going to try and accomplish today. So I'm also trying to be mindful of those who are interpreting, who had indicated that last time it was very difficult to find out who's talking because they suggested name tags, but they also have suggested perhaps what we could do is to get people to introduce themselves. But before I get there, I just want to introduce myself, to say that I'm Nomfundo Walaza. From Peace Systems. I was called to come and help with this process. And I think the reason I was asked was because I'm a signatory to the agreement that was reached with the students in November of 2016. So I know the details of that agreement, and I've got a copy with me, and I'm going to make some references to it at some point. But perhaps the place to start, again, because also there are different constituencies represented here, is so that everybody who's listening to this knows who is sitting around the table, is for all of us to do some introductions, just in a simple way, just to say your name and the constituency that you represent, so that we can help the interpreters and also be able to get the meeting to go forward. One of the things that I'm going to ask is, can everybody hear me? Am I clear? Because there is a humming voice, and I think it's the aircon. So, and I'm trying to speak as loudly as possible, but I think it's important that everybody sees me.
Can we turn it off? Yeah, Can we turn it off?
Is it possible to turn the aircon off for? Why?
That is actually an extractor, and the aircon is switched off. So
Okay.
that is noise from.
We turn the extractor off.
We
did it
What
last
is
workshop.
being extracted exactly? Hot air. Okay, hot air. No pun intended. I'm fascinated by the interpretation because because I can see she's even interpreting that I'm smiling. Thank you. Can we then, because one of the things that I want to also set up front in this meeting, and thank you very much for everyone to be here, because I think everybody was here more or less around about the time we're supposed to start, that my understanding is that this meeting will start supposedly at 3 o'clock and end at 5. And it's important that we keep that time, because sometimes people start leaving and then the momentum is lost. So I'm going to try and keep us to that time and try and facilitate in a manner that we can try and get something done by then. So maybe we should start with the introductions then. And can we start from that corner? Russell, can you start us with introductions, just in terms of who you are and what constituency you represent in this meeting today?
I'm not sure who I am anymore.
What hat are you wearing?
I'm still suffering from jet lag. So I'm Russell Halley, and I'm in the Development and Alumni Department, where we do fundraising on behalf of the university, and where we also look after the relationships that we have with our alumni here locally and in other parts of the world. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Samuel Shetty from the Employees Union of the University of Cape Town, also the largest university on campus.
Can I ask from is that, you can hear, right? Are we okay? Okay, thank you.
Manda Muraut, Academics Union.
Academic student.
Catherine Hutchins, Academics Union.
Okay.
Naledi Baba, SRC.
SRC.
Lorna Houston, alumni rep.
Sipati Chabalala, SRC.
SRC.
Sinoxolo Boy, Track Vote RC.
Sonobon Melwane, Fasta.
Same heads of department.
van Steen, Erik van Steen, Head of Department. Erik van Steen, Head of Department.
Your name again?
Erik van Steen.
Oh, I'm Tembele Hlanganani. I represent Verge Student Formations.
Loretta Ferris, I'm a member of the executive.
Max Price, member of the executive.
Nicola Elling, representative for the Senate.
Debbie Buckler from Council. And I'm typing what we're saying. I'm not working on other things.
Thank you very much. Can I please ask if there are people who are...
Namfunda, can I come in, please?
Yes.
What? Who's that?
What is that? That was,
Who's coming in? Can I? Hello?
Is there someone connected to us?
Oh, Bully is on Skype, so that must have been.
Oh, there's somebody on Skype. Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that.
Actually, yes.
So can you introduce yourself?
I can hear you. Oh.
Okay. Bully.
Alumni.
Alumni.
Yes.
Okay.
She's in Durban.
Maybe just
Yeah. Bully.
Magula.
Bully, we've just
Yes, Namfunda.
we've just done a round of introductions in terms of just trying to make sure that everybody who's around the table identifies themselves, and the reason was so that the interpreters at least know, and also I know who is represented around the table. And now we've also have the chair the chair of council walking in. Introductions.
My name is Sipo Pichana. My apologies for getting lost.
Yeah. Okay. I think where I was leading to the next point was that are we now everybody who's supposed to be here is here, so we can begin.
In 2 seconds, we have one more person who needs to introduce themselves.
Can you please introduce yourself, sir, and which?
One of the candidates who signed the agreement and also a member of the SSC. Academic.
Okay. Thank you very much. Where I'm going to start, because I think it's very important so that we understand, and I understand that people probably got the invitation, but I think it's important just to say that where we are is that, and I'm just going to read part of the invitation to this meeting. The Shakeville student argued that the November agreement had been violated. According to the agreement, if one party alleges violation of the agreement, the mediator will be brought in to resolve the dispute. A facilitated meeting was held between members of the executive and the student formation who were party to the original agreement to see if the matter could be resolved. It has not yet been resolved, but in process it has become clearer that ideally all the steering committee stakeholders need to participate in a discussion about the private security issues, since it has caused stakeholders who were not party to the agreement to withdraw. Therefore, I'm proposing a workshop to discuss the future of the steering committee and the IRCT process, with specific reference to the current impasse and to understand what would be required to get all parties back to the table. This workshop will be again facilitated by Mfundo Alaza. So this is why we're here. I'm hoping that's an agreement from all that's why we're here, right? Okay. I then also wanted to, just as opening remarks, to declare a few things. One is that I was party to the signing of the agreement. So in a way, I'm part of the people who are steward to the agreement that was signed. So that I want to just clarify. So I'm not somebody who's been brought in who has not been party to this. So that's where I stand. The other thing that I wanted to clarify is that over and above the people who signed the agreement, we've got other people who were not in that meeting, who have read the document and who are understanding it from reading it. So we also have different stakeholders who've got various aspirations, various fears about what was signed or what was agreed and what was not agreed. And I just want to declare that and put that forward as a point to consider before we start. The other thing that I thought was important was to perhaps, before we even embark on the discussion that before us, to just, for me to just, and that's why I asked for that agreement to be put there, to just go back to the section that deals with private security, because that's what has caused the impasse, and just say what it was intended to, so that we can talk about whether that was achieved or not achieved, if there were recommendations, and why we're sitting here, because that will guide the discussion as to what we need to do in order to get over the impasse. So that was point number 6 on the agreement, I understand. So can you pull it up, please? I just want to go through that very quickly before we start with the formal discussions. Where is it?
Still loading.
Huh?
It's still loading.
It's still loading. Okay. Maybe whilst it's still loading, because I've got the copy here, it's the agreement with SRC candidates, Shekville, TRC, and other student formations, which was signed on the 7th, I think, or on the 6th. Was it the 7th or the 6th? Sorry. 7th of November 2016. Point number 6 deals with the use of private security and police in managing protest on campus. The council has already appointed a committee jointly with the institutional forum to develop a protocol for the use of private security. This committee will solicit views from all stakeholders in formulating a protocol and consult on the proposed protocol before submitting to council. It is envisaged the draft should be complete by year-end, which is 2016. In the interim, if an agreement that was at that time is reached on these principles, which leads to a de-escalation of conflict, the executive is open to removing private security as soon as possible. That is what was said. And there was supposed to be, if I look at that, there was supposed to be a formation of a committee that will then develop protocols that will avoid a situation where there is conflict or where the private security is brought on campus without consultation. So maybe where we need to start, without preempting anything, is just for me to, as a mediator. Also, I think that what is important also, maybe I should also read this, that the agreement is signed by the executive and SRC candidates, Shekville TRC. The parties agree that the mediators to this agreement will oversee its implementation and be called upon to adjudicate if any party to the agreement believes that there have been any violations. The mediators will recommend what processes are to be followed in any such instance. So that was the closing of this whole paragraph. So maybe it will be important for us to first and foremost talk about the formation of that, the committee that was to develop a protocol. If there is such a committee, and if there isn't, just to reflect on why there isn't that, because maybe that would have averted a situation on the 5th of September this year where private security was called without a body that would oversee what happens in such an instance.
Yeah.
Deborah.
Yeah, the subcommittee was actually, it's a committee, it was a joint committee of council and institutional forum.
Yeah.
And it was actually established before that agreement was signed.
Okay.
So it was already in place. We had hoped to do the work last year, but because of the protests and everything being delayed, we didn't get round to it. So we started again this year once the students were back on campus. We had a whole process mapped out, which in the first part of it, the executive wrote their understanding of what was happened. We set that round so that with the question of where do you think they went wrong, where do you think they went right, and that was what had happened with Shackville and with other protests that had led to private security being brought onto campus in the past. The idea was that and the interim protocols that existed would be sent to all the different constituencies, and then the subcommittee would meet with each of the subcommittees to hear from them their feedback on those. So that was a purely listening exercise, where we will, what was wrong with what was on the table and what had been done. The committee would then draft something, send it to all the stakeholder groups again, get feedback, revise it, and then it would go through IS and then through council. The executive duty wrote, we sent it all out to ask the constituencies to indicate when they would be available to meet with us, and we got no responses. We reminded, and Shackville TRC came back and said they thought that we shouldn't do it, it should rather go to the IRTC. There was then follow-up with all the other constituencies, and nobody seemed keen to meet with us. So it was then taken to the institutional forum to say, this is where we are, we're stuck. Will you, as the group that represents everybody, facilitate it actually working, or do you think it should go to the IRTC? And the IF felt it should go to the IRTC. So the committee is no more, but didn't complete its work.
Okay.
So we're in a interregnum.
Can I hear?
Chair, I'm coming to this conversation from a point of disadvantage because I was not part of that meeting which signed the agreement. But reading that, can I call the clause?
Yeah.
Reading that clause there, I would like to think that there was a discussion which preceded that clause. And from what I'm reading, it looks like, and I'm subject to correction here, it looks like there was an agreement that maybe there was a discussion that there should be no use of private security. So what I'm asking this meeting to take me back to is what sort of conversation preceded that clause? Because my assumption is that there was an agreement that there should be no use, or protocols must be developed, but there were no protocols developed according to what the Deputy Chair is saying.
Can you read exactly what you are reading to?
May I interpret? May I step in?
I just want to get a sense of what sort of conversation, very, very briefly, Chair, preceded that clause, because I was not part of that meeting. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like there was some agreement in that meeting or in that conversation that there should not be a use of private security.
Okay, sure. So let's take it back to the point of negotiation, right? So starting from the TRC, and obviously it was then understood that the TRC is going to comment on the use of private security, legitimate protest, the disciplinary cases that are happening and everything else, right? And what is it that would lead, the lead up to the Shackville's February 16th events, and the executive reviews and response thereto. So if you read that line, particularly because just to answer these direct questions, the first two sentences, the council has already appointed a committee joining with IF to develop a protocol for the use of private security. In the second sentence, the committee will solicit views from all stakeholders in formulating a protocol. So that line is futuristic. The first says what's actually currently in place, because at the time that you were negotiating, that committee did exist, right? it is the same committee. I believe that actually even existed before SRC in SRC 2016. Because I remember on the 23rd of February 2016, I resigned from the SRC because they commented and ratified the use of private security. And then it was my submission and the submission of many students that we cannot be commenting on code of conduct for private security. Because like these are not the people that will give a code of conduct to. But either way. So anyway, so the second sentence then speaks of an ongoing committee. And this committee will solicit views. It tells you the mandate of the committee, right? And I'm actually going to do this and bring it line by line. And then from the third sentence on, it is then envisaged that the draft should be complete by the end of the year. In the interim, that then completes the future. In the interim, even an agreement is reached on these principles, which leads to a de-escalation of conflict. The executive is open to removing private security as soon as possible. Now we then bring it to what was happening in 2016 at that particular point in time, right? So we had a plenary where you and Chief were, a two-day plenary with actually everybody in management, right? And we had asked that, so after we've given our demand that you should sign, management, and we told them that we want a complete withdrawal of private security, they have the view that what if something happens on the Monday, even after we've signed this agreement? So what we had then agreed on was a gradual de-escalation. Dr. Price, I remember, specifically wanted to say that his proposal was, if nothing happens on Monday or Tuesday, we can then come back to you on Wednesday and we can have conversation. Now that we can see there is commitment, at least in principle, that there will have an incident-free exams. We said, no, we will sign now, but what we will give you, because we want to protect your exams, is time to see that we are committed to this agreement and there will be no incidences at all, right? It was our understanding at the time, and I've got email threads that will prove this. It was our understanding at the time that within 72 hours, after the agreement has been signed and there's been no disruption whatsoever, private security will be removed. But no, it didn't take 72 hours, it took 3 weeks. And we sent many emails protesting. Mascole even once wrote a Facebook post saying that UST management has breached the agreement. Of which that Facebook post was responded to by Judith, the tweet, to Mascole, saying, Max, what are you talking about? When you say UST management has breached the agreement. And Max responded in the same email, says to everybody else, that what I'm talking about is that the private security was supposed to have been removed by this point in time because it's under agreement on the 7th of November, today is this date, and Vita Scholar is still here. Those things did not happen. I sent many emails to Munira, Dr. Anya, Professor Mole was there, whereby private security was lurking around Steve Biko. So the point of this then, particularly in the last line, is that if an agreement is reached which leads to de-escalation, and the de-escalation, they will gauge what is the de-escalation sufficient enough for them to believe that listen, nothing will happen. Then they will remove private security. Where and how lawyers in this room read that private management reserves the right to call private security within that particular agreement, I do not understand. Also from the signatures that were there at that particular point in time, knowing very well the conversation of which that particular agreement was signed. And more specifically, if you just read Belma's Facebook post, will put in crystal clear context upon which lines of that agreement speak to.
Can we hear from you?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying I'm not sure whether you feel, I'm not sure whether the most useful way to spend our time is to spend time arguing whether the agreement has been breached or not. I think we should spend some time on that, but I do want to point out that we met with the students who were party to the agreement a few weeks ago with Jeff, and we tried to do this as well. And we didn't think that that was a conversation that would involve everyone else, and that's why we just had this, and this is what's happening now. So I do want to respond briefly, but say that I think we should perhaps be trying to focus on, given where we are we all committed to the IRTC? What do we need to do to get back there? But let me answer because it's been said. I agree almost 100% with Senator Carlo's analysis and his recount. I think we differ perhaps on two issues. One is that the gradual removal, and it says open to removing, it wasn't a commitment to removing, but it's open to removing, so therefore even if we hadn't removed it, that would not have been a breach of the agreement, but that would have been bad faith, but not a breach of the agreement. But the gradual removal was based on our sense that the threat of a disruption was diminishing progressively. And we were particularly taken by the students' view that having Vita Scola and other security at the doors of the exams and parading on campus created a level of anxiety for people writing exams that affected them. And so what we would do is we would remove them from the exam venues and put them maybe on standby out of sight, so they weren't altogether off the campus. And then we would de-escalate and have only the non-uniform private security. And so yes, there was some private security for still 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks, I don't exactly know, but it was, the Vita Scola, as I recall, was gone within a week. But the question is, does that clause mean that we can't bring private security back in the future, 9 months later? And I don't think we ever discussed that. I think we were talking about private security in exams. And the reason why I think it would be the wrong reading of that agreement to think that we would never bring private security back is 2 things. One is there's a reference to a committee that was looking at a protocol. Now, why would we have a committee which was going to report to council to discuss a protocol on how to use private security if there was already a view that we would never use private security under any circumstances? It wouldn't make sense. It would be contradictory. And certainly from the executive's point of view, and I think Russell is probably the only person here who was in that discussion from the exec side, certainly from the executive side, we did not think we were waiving the right ever in the future to use private security. We were talking about private security for the exams, a commitment not to disrupt, and a process that would continue to develop a protocol for the future use of private security, which hadn't yet been completed. And of course, we thought it would be completed by the end of the year, but it still isn't completed. The second reason why I think that's the wrong reading is because it's quite clear that the reduction of private security is linked to a de-escalation of conflict. The converse of that is that should there be an escalation of conflict, that we would be fully entitled to bring private security back. And so the question now is, did we think there was a legitimate threat 3 weeks ago that could have resulted in an escalation of conflict such that we would have private security on standby? So let me say we did not bring private security back. They were not on campus. They haven't been on campus in that form. But we perceived that there was a threat that was of equal measure to the kind of threat that we were facing when we were in those discussions. And for that reason, we think it was justified to have them on standby. And I think that's where, there may be a disagreement or a difference of interpretation of that agreement. But I must say that from the executive's point of view, we never believed that we were foregoing the right forever under any circumstances to use private security.
So I was going to say, that's where for me the tension then comes in as someone that wasn't there and not privy to, wasn't part of the negotiations, I'm just coming in now, is that I would have also, so you asked about kind of the committee. I would have even disagreed with there even being a committee, because to have a committee means that we're even considering the idea of private security. And this is where, for me, I asked the question of, in this IRTC process, those of us who are privy to this discussion, are we just here to hop along and go on for the ride? What if there's something that we fundamentally disagree with? It seems as if it's something that we haven't been, we can't change it. And that for me is where then the contention comes in, because as far as I'm concerned, or people that are form part of my constituency, private security should never be on campus. And as long as there's private security, whether there's disruptions or not, I can say that I will never be part of this process. And I just think that's where then that complication comes in for those people who are not part of that. And maybe this is even a question, how do we then, where do we fall part in these types of discussions? Because what if a lot of us believe the fact that there shouldn't even be a committee? Because I even interpret the fact that because there's going to be a committee and we're developing a protocol, it means that we are insinuating that we are even contemplating. So that for me, that whole agreement, the first sentence should not even be there, because there should never ever be private security on campus, ever. And that's where I personally come in, is the fact that whether there's disruptions or not, my constituency will not be part of this process if this campus, this academic institution is ever militarized in an already violent society that normalizes violence.
Okay, there's a hand there, and then there's Russell, and then back to Snowball.
Yeah, I think then what will maybe provide some sort of in the instances where management has either deployed private security on call or on campus, be it the ones that are physically visible or the ones that are in civilian status, what protocols did they use in that process and who was consulted? Just so that we have an idea of what's going on like inside. Like how did they regard like what constitutes a threat enough for them to bring private security on campus or let them be on call? I think that's just a question that I have.
You want to ask that question?
Yeah.
Well, I can answer it, but should we? Are we finished with the discussion about the agreement? Because in a sense, I agree with Thembelihle, but Thembelihle's point is that we are not in breach of the agreement. The fact that there was a committee implied that there was consideration of the use of private security, and therefore the agreement also implies that bringing private security, we may disagree, and I'm happy to answer the question about whether we brought it in too quickly, but simply the fact of having access to using private security is not in breach of the agreement. And I think we should set that therefore aside and move forward to say, how should we work in the future so that people do not feel we are undermining a process by using private security.
Perhaps, can I hold your question? Can we go to Russell and then come to you and then come to you and then I'm going to try and bring this to the close because we do need to come to the question, what would it take for the parties to engage in order for the processes to go forward? And this is an impasse, so we can't not discuss it. So we're just doing that and just giving it as much time as we can. So
thank you, Chair. I think it's important that this discussion is put in its broader context as well, because I think there's perhaps a misunderstanding really of what was meant by developing a protocol. Because this was not only in relation to protest. A protocol, for example, could say that private security should never be used for protest. There's nothing that prevents a protocol from saying that. But it could say private security should be there if buildings are under threat, if the university needs to protect itself against whatever the circumstances may be. There was also a concern that it may not necessarily be the students themselves who are disrupted. Remember, we were in a situation where it was quite volatile, and there were concerns that other universities that may not have written, students there may feel that UCT should also not be writing, and the students were saying, we can't take responsibility for that if that happens. And so the issue of private security was in that context as well. So I don't want us to have this idea that private security was just simply about policing political protest. It was a broader discussion. And therefore, to sort of take the position that why was this even in the agreement when on principle the issue of private security should never ever be discussed is to miss that broader conversation that was actually taking place.
Thanks, Russell. And Snowball, you had your hand. And then you, and then...
Chairperson, I'll try to be very, very calm, and I'll try to correct my thoughts, but also indulge my bit. If there's one thing, and that's one okay, is to be patronized. But okay, fine, let me calm down a bit. Anyway, so we've always differentiated between security of the university and safety of the university, right? If I don't know what, Boko Haram from Nigeria infiltrates South Africa and wants to shut down UCT, right? That's a different situation. That's that Shevo cannot control. That obviously then the university will need to respond to even protect Shevo, to even protect me, to protect everyone in this room. Okay? That's not what happened in September. And obviously this thing of what if other universities feel that UCT should not write while they are not writing their exams. First Months for Protest did not start in 2015. We think they started in 2015 because they started UCT, right? I remember even before I went to university, there was a point in time in 2013 where CBT was shut down. How many times did they try to say UCT then? So this red herring argument of this external threat, when there's been no external threat at UCT, it is for as long as I know, right? And that being used as a reason as to why we need to reserve this right to have private security is very malicious and it's patronizing. Then let's go on to the second point. So there are two discussions here. One, okay, we pulled out because we said the agreement has been breached, right? And management says that no, it has not been breached. Actually, because like there's in the clause that says you cannot call private security. Fine. I'm willing then to concede on the technical reading of that agreement that they are not disbarred from calling private security. However, then, if that is then for them a leeway for them to call private security, then this goes to my second major point is, then what does it make of the entire process that we've been through thus far? Because although you may not have directly breached the agreement, because like, this is the logic here, right? It is a law that if you do a crime, and there isn't a law saying that thing is a crime, then what you did is not a crime. Before culpable homicide was a crime, people could drink and drive and kill. Up until South Africa was like, actually, this thing is not good, people are dying. But anyway, then the principle here is you have violated, like you've violated a very good thing. As hard as it was, you violated a good thing that was happening here, right? You violated, at least in spirit and in principle, the spirit of this particular agreement. If not then, the words in that agreement. But then the actions and what this agreement proposed to achieve is objective. That's what has been violated. So to take a very defensive position to say that no, as our reading, we were okay on this, and to show no remorse, even acknowledgement of violating the trust and the working relationship that we've been trying to do and to bring this university to a particular point, for me then puts into questioning and into disrepute everything here. When you say that we viewed a threat on the 5th of September that was of equal significance and magnitude as that which had happened last year, right? And therefore we needed our private security to be on standby as an absolute last resort. Heaven knows what the dictionary means about those words. For me, it's a thing of, then what do you make of this past, however, so many months, 11 months, whereby I've engaged? I left UCT on the 23rd of December, came back on the 2nd of January, right? At that point in time, it was Fees Must Fall, we were like instrumentalizing the agreement, the resident situation, the Bremen occupation, like there were so many things, right? That were of equal significance, but never ever had we posed that much of a threat, and never ever have they called in private sec. So it's a thing of, my point is this: failure to appreciate what has been done, and but resorting back to a technical reading of the agreement, then questions this entire IRTC process. It puts it in jeopardy.
Chair was acknowledged.
Oh, sorry. You were acknowledged, and then you were also acknowledged after. Sorry.
Yes, it's fine, Chair. I am partly captured by Osina Kolo, but I think I'd like to add another element to this, just to show the dynamics that are at play in this IRTC event. I mean, I sat in an institutional forum and I did question Dr. Price as to what is the protocol that you actually followed to call private security for the 5th of September. And this room and Sinakalo, and everyone is reinforcing that that agreement seems to state that, well, we feel that this agreement is, the agreement seems to state that there would be no private security. However, they're defending that it said that they would be allowed a certain protocol. They had sort of autonomy to decide on the protocol to have private security. But that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because then when we do ask about the protocol, you say there is no protocol again, to which you then, like, I think I just want to highlight sort of like the weirdness in the responses, man. It's strange, because you say there is no protocol to call private security, there's only protocol in this institution to call police services. And so the issue is, we felt that there was a credible threat, to which we asked, what was the credible threat? And now Dr. Ali, I don't know who Russell is referencing, for outside threats, external threats, other varsities were a threat. But at the time, at the context, if you remember correctly, at the beginning of September, the workers were trying to have a legal strike. And I mean, the calling of private security can be seen to be against a proper protest. It could be seemingly, I mean, it feels like propaganda to say, you know, we're putting private, and we're not saying that you put private security there on that day, you put it before. And to me as a student who might have wanted to stand in solidarity with the workers, that was a warning to me to say, look, if this protest continues, that there will be private security and action will be taken against me as someone wants to join this protest. So again, I echo against Nicola's concerns of trust. I can't trust you. Because every time you try to engage her in this process, things like this happen. You call private security. I can't trust you. Like, how can I trust that we're going to continue with this process? How can I trust that? I don't know. I can't trust. I can't trust the answers. I can't trust the process, because we're going back and forth.
like.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I'm loud enough. I do want to say, firstly, I wonder what will take of all of us to come back into the IRTC movement, be committed to the process itself, regardless of how we may feel or be different. Of course, we must not trust those who are in power, but they are not here because they want to, because they are forced by the conditions of the country. So we are considering that, but I do want to appeal, because we had this conversation, the lengthy one, last time we met with the Vice Chancellor of Management here about our interpretation of the agreement and our interpretation of that particular clause. And I think that we did exhaust and we feel like there is a deadlock, of course, and that deadlock in itself is an ideological deadlock. And something that which cannot be resolved here. I don't think it will be resolved here in the moment. But I do want to ask what will also take us to be recommitted to the process, noting time and noting what is at stake with this process. Because we know that certain communities, certain concessions that would not have been done in an ordinary basis. But we did make a mention that it will be oblivious of us or ignorant to speak of private security as if we are not in a particular context and time in which private security is called upon. Just like we will never speak about police presence in campus the way in which we were speaking about if 2015 did not happen when we saw police opening fire in the university, which led us into an agreement to speak about what is the protocol of management to bring about police and private security, without neglecting the power that they have to bring about those things in the case of emergency and in the case of safety. But these are two different things. We are in a politically contested environment. We argue that the reason why we will have such violence in the university, as we have characterized, it is a response to a particular violence that the university exert on black bodies. So for you to speak about private security, you must also consider the conditions in which they create a conflict. And one being, we always said that the university is a university of white people, and the university celebrates and glorifies settlers. And this in itself exerts a particular violence to the black psyche that cannot be explained, cannot be washed away, and cannot be justified by buildings needed to be protected over black bodies who are suffering on a daily basis. So I do want to make a mention that in UCT particularly, we have never said that the university cannot protect its own university. But we are understanding that in the context in which private security is being brought in the university, comes at a particular point in time. And every time it has been called, it has always been a response to that context, without first resolving the issues that brings us through that process. So, but I do want to appeal that at least before we dwell deeper on what our understanding, I think it should be wise to ask what will be our commitment to come back, what are the conditions then in moving forward, because we cannot undo what has happened. I think the management itself did last time mention that perhaps they should have consulted with the IRTC to say that this is the threat, because we have all different bodies. I didn't know the threat. Apparently there was a mass meeting, and then there was a Facebook updates, and there was noise happening about a strike being lodged of workers, and then that was perceived as going to be a threat. But I think that since there were different stakeholders, that conversation that we held here easily been resolved if it was seen as a threat. Exactly. So for management to go on independently alone to call private security was flexing of its power and also undermining our ability to sit here as if we are just stooges. So I think that if we can just perhaps move, understanding those bases that we are committed, but at least what we will take from all of us to help in this moment.
I saw your hand, but I'm not sure if it was before. I think you were first and then, didn't you, Rice? Yeah, it was yours, yeah. I'm looking at you. Sorry. No, I'm looking at you. Okay, sorry.
So thank you, Nomfundo. And I actually want to, so this is a good segue for into what I want to say. But allow me just quickly, Sepati, to address the issue of a protocol. I think when we're talking in that sense about a protocol, it's really similar to the current protocol around the presence of police, which was in fact developed after the incident in 2015 when the police came onto campus, which currently, by the way, says you must first call private security before you can call the police. And so that's, you know, I just want to distinguish that from, is there any kind of decision making that happens with respect to private security. But what I really then wanted to say is we need to recognize that perhaps there is some kind of an ideological deadlock. And this meeting is not, I think, going to resolve the final decision around private security, whether, and we have made the decision within the institutional forum that we will refer that to the IRTC, which really then makes it very urgent for us to actually have the IRTC set up so that one of the issues that they address is this issue of private security. And so the question for us now, I think, is in the interim, how do we deal with really, I want to call it two sets of reactions. Let me start with the executive. The executive is in a position where we perceive a threat. It may be a threat to the academic process continuing, it may be a threat to operations, it may be a threat to safety, etc. I think the default position is how do we secure the university against that threat? So that's almost on this side of the continuum. On the other side is, I think often there's sort of, well, there's an issue, we're going to protest. And so we see that as a threat. And how do we come closer together? And how do we close that gap so that we actually leverage perhaps the IRTC, other structures to find a way to sort of, that none of us go into a default, so that we can say there's an issue. We need to resolve that issue. And what are the steps, especially now in the interim period, what are the steps that we can follow? How can we, I don't know, how can we use the IRTC to resolve an issue? Or how can we use other structures to kind of get to a position where none of us have to go into our defaults? And that's maybe an ideal, and then maybe the next step is, well, we may do that, and then we deadlock, and then what? But I think we need to be able to first agree to not go into defaults. And Mr. Tola, you're right. We already acknowledged that on the 6th of September, we could have leveraged some of the processes and the structures that actually sits within the agreement to kind of not go there as a default.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very difficult situation that we find ourselves in, because regardless of what's written on the paper, we've been in a process, a difficult one, but in fact our last meeting was a very difficult meeting, but we were still trying to hold ourselves together, and we did in that meeting, even though it was very difficult. And so this action, I really don't know if there's a full appreciation of how this was such an ill-timed decision in terms of the IRTC's process, because I think it's taken a lot of work to get the IRTC somewhere, and now we find ourselves, sorry, you're nodding?
No, he was indicating that he would like to speak.
Okay.
So I was saying, I was nodding that I've seen him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that it's so, it really makes all of this very difficult. Sino's point that he made earlier, I think, is a very powerful one. There's been a number of incidences that's occurred early on in the year, including an occupation of Bremner. And in that instance, there was no private security. So it's difficult to understand what happened in September. It's really difficult to understand how did that come about. It's hard to make sense of how we've been trying, I thought, but I can't help but question, you know. So maybe the whole interactions in this IRTC space was not everybody trying, because that's really the question I sit with now, I think, and that's why I'm saying it's ill-timed, because we've come quite a ways, and through difficulty, still having faith in each other. But this is actually, I think, brought question to that. That because now I wonder, but maybe there were some people weren't trying, and they really just were playing a game here. And so, you know, it's making, that's just my honest feeling, that because if we were trying, then I would have hoped that some different response would have taken place. And even our Professor Ferris has said, you know, that there was, the protest was seen as a threat. And a protest must be recognized as a right, because that's what it is. So we mustn't feel that when people say that they're going to have a strike, which actually is a legal strike, that it's something that's threatening. And I can't say how somebody else must feel, but I mean, I would hope that that is not the response that's coming every time that there is a protest. But at the same time, I'm kind of saying it doesn't make sense to me, because I don't understand how when there was a Bremner occupation, it didn't necessitate the private security, and simply when there was a submission of a call to strike, there was. My mind cannot reconcile these things. I think that it's important that we understand how such a thing comes to be. But the other point I want to make, because I'm speaking maybe too long, is we requested in our, as alumni, we said we would like to see the contract with the private security. We haven't had a clear response on seeing that contract. That request is still there. Yeah. Thank you.
Chair, sorry. Just a point of clarification, Chair, please. I think it's very important.
I was going to do some clarification, so.
Can I?
It's just a point of clarification, Chair.
Okay,
I really think it's important that when we have this kind of discussion, that there's a common understanding of what we are discussing. Because there was the issue of a strike or the issues of workers was never an issue here for private security. So I think that needs to be corrected, because if that's the impression, then it takes the discussion in a completely tangential direction.
Say that again, Russell.
I'm saying, Chair, that the issue of private security that's been referred to by students and others, and it's not about whether they were right or wrong, or management was right or wrong. It was what was the reason for private security. That needs to be clarified. It was never about a strike or about a protest. And so it is wrong to continue the discussion on that assumption. The issue of private security, and you can say that the executive overreacted, or the executive was wrong, was in direct response to a posting that went out saying that the next day there was going to be a shutdown. That was the reason that the issue of private security was discussed. And private security was never brought onto campus. That's another important consideration. There was consultation as to would private security be used if there was going to be this threatened shutdown of the university. So to present an argument that private security was about preventing a strike by workers or protest by students is incorrect. It was the threat of a shutdown that led to the executive discussing that particular question. That's very important.
Okay, that's
So that,
Can
so
I-
that was going to be my clarification.
That was going to be your clarification, exactly that. That the reason, and I think it goes back to the question that you asked, as to what was the nature of the
Yeah, I want
threat
to.
that caused the university to bring the private security on campus, right?
To add to that, the only visible instance where we were aware that private security was on campus or on call was on the 5th of September when there was a photograph of private security circulating. So that means we're assuming that that was the only instance where there was private security, and there may have been other instances where we are not aware. Not the visibly suited private security, but those in civilian
Mr.
status
Scholar.
as well. So I wanted to know, in those instances, what was the protocol used and who was consulted, given that the committee there was never constituted or it was disbanded, it doesn't exist at the moment.
May I just add?
No, it was, you had your hand up as well. Can I? go to you?
Since the point of clarification has been made, could I just complete, because I'm almost covered. The question was asked, why was there no private security called when there was an occupation of Bremner? And the point is that simple protests, even inconvenient protests, even disruptive protests, we have not acted by bringing private security on, and we would not. And our track record is that we have not. So why would we put anything else at risk on the 5th of September? Because this was quite a different order of magnitude. This was not about a protest, nor was it about a strike. The workers had said they were going to strike, and there was a meeting held, and we could see that there were about 200 people at the meeting, and about 100 of them were students. The meeting not only called at that meeting, but also posted on Facebook that at 6:30 the next morning, there would be a shutdown. Now, a strike is not a shutdown. When workers withhold their labor in a strike, then they refuse to work. But they don't shut down the institution. For example, we can bring in other people. The law allows us to bring in other people to do the work. Or we can do, this was going to be mostly catering workers. And so what we would have done is we would have issued vouchers if the strike took place so that the rest of the university continues. There was no threat for the bus drivers or from other things or from academics or anyone else. So a strike is not a shutdown. But the call was for students to come and participate and support that strike by shutting down the university. It was the first threat of a shutdown we'd had since the earlier November agreement. It was a threat that we believed was credible. It was going to happen the next morning. In fact, before the strike was due to start, they were going to start the shutdown. And what we did was not to heavily populate the campus with private security. We made the decision to have them on standby. There was one photograph of a vehicle which went viral, but that vehicle was not on campus. It was the place where our security officers on Main Road, Rondebosch, where they work from. It wasn't on our campus, and it was a standby in case there would have been some action that would have caused the university to shut down the following day. And if we hadn't been able to negotiate with the workers and with students and to do. But we have acknowledged, as Mr. Poyle said, we have acknowledged at the previous meeting that what we should have done and what we will do in the future is that, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Ferris, is that we should have called the RRTT and we should have said to the students, we are going to put private security on standby because we believe this credible threat. That threat was called, and I just want to talk about breaches of the agreement. That threat of a shutdown was called by one of the signatories of the agreement, not present here today, not an active participant in the RRTT or in the steering committee, but a signatory to the agreement. And I think that agreement says that there would not be shutdowns, and that the principles that lead to the de-escalation of violence would also, there would be protests. But I don't think we can accept that there can be shutdowns in terms of that agreement.
Okay, I'm going to allow a few hands, and then I'm going to try and just say a few things from where I stand as a person who was a signatory to that agreement, and how I also saw, or at least interpret, what might have gone wrong, that we possibly sitting in the situation that we're sitting in now. But first of all, I take that hand and take that hand and take this hand and take this hand and try, and then you'd be the last, and then I'm trying to.
I just like a bit of clarity at the beginning. I need more clarity at the beginning. So the threat was that there was going to be a shutdown. to which the Vice Chancellor called a meeting with the SRC and Shackville and sat down with the SRC. According to my knowledge, this was the previous Friday, even before the 5th.
No, that wasn't when there was a
Did
threat.
that not?
No,
Okay.
no, nothing
okay.
related to that.
Further clarity.
Unrelated.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Further clarity. A Facebook post. Actually, Che, let me not go in that direction. It's fine. I succumb.
Chairperson,
It's fine.
Yes, I come.
can I? Also, I've written a mind map of everything I want to say, so I'll go through this paper, right? First of all, let's start with the. Okay, let's start with Dr. Price's point first, right? That you viewed the magnitude of the September 5th as highly significant, and it's actually such that it was even wider. It equated it was a possible catalyst to a potential shutdown. And we can see that this was a reading of Atabile's Facebook post, right? And then we can also further concede that had Atabile said he was protesting at 6:30 and not use the word shutdown, that there would not be they would allowed to think from what I hear that had Atabile said that we are protesting at 6:30 and not use the word shutdown, we would then have not had private security, right? Because from what I get, the magnitude.
Can you say that again? I didn't.
Had Atabile not used the word shutdown
In his
and
Facebook
put
post.
the word protest instead, right?
Yeah.
That would have put then a different magnitude to the particular post.
Yeah.
We agree.
Yeah.
Sure. If then I were to do a Facebook audit, and if I were to put my log on my Facebook account now and put the word shutdown,
Then do.
right? And see how many times shutdown has been used, even by signatories of the agreement, right? That argument flies out of the window. That on a reading of a particular word instead of that word, actually it goes like this. And secondly, right, let me tell you what spread the magnitude of the threat. Atabile has like what, 1,000 friends on his Facebook post, right? How many friends do you have on email? 27,000. Atabile says we're gonna shut down the school, and you'll be like, oh wow, shit, this is big, let me help him. So let me email the entire school and say that there's a potential shutdown tomorrow happening at 6:30. But anyway, let's then go back to, that's just basic common sense. Going back to my normal things, my points. So there's an issue here, right? Starting with Professor Sferri's response to Mascoli, and I actually want to go to the London Mascoli saying, but like there's an issue here which again will always bring us to this point, is that what is our defaults? We need to understand we've got different defaults, right? So how do we avoid a situation whereby we do not revert to our defaults? Great question. But now let's also understand what is our defaults, because I think then we have a different assumption of what the default of Shakutarse is, and I've got a different interpretation of a default, right? It is not our default that we will protest. That takes a lot of energy. It's much easier to send an email and have a meeting and discuss an issue and have a resolution and have it done, and then everybody's happy and then sing Kumbaya Malud. That is a much easier protest. That's a much easier process. We can even have snacks on the go. In a protest, we don't do that, right? That is the default. Only then, when we've had so many meetings, and we're losing lecture time, we're losing everything, like you're just frustrated of repeating the same argument to the same people time and again, and reasoning doesn't seem to permeate in the room, do we then say, let's speak in the language that they may possibly understand, let's protest, right? Protest then is, on that line of reasoning then, protest is not a default. It's a last line, it's a last resort, premised not on this is the easiest way to get things, but rather premised on frustration and on rage. And this is what I think I understand by what a protest is generally. Give me one issue out of a hat, and I'll show you that there was engagement before with whoever, and only then these people have protested. That's our default, right? And then from then, what is then your default to a protest, right? Your default, and actually don't correct me, it is that knee-jerk reaction to people protesting, right? I'm going to try to speak to them so I don't not call in private sick, right? But like this thing, the idea that you can securitize a protest at the back of your head, right? Then so that there are three things that are done. Whenever there's protest, there's engagement. I will credit that to the management. But there's always ever been engagement in everything else. Then there is we talk, we have committees, but the thing is, if you've got private security or some security measure at the back of your head and you're going to engagement, what then that means about the engagement that is not genuine, but rather it's a courtesy. And if you act, right, and if you deliver, that is a luxury. And that's what happens when you go into engagement with a thing that at any point in time, I will simply make a call to Vita Scholar or to whomever. Because if you did not have that option, that I will simply make a call to Vita Scholar, then you go into the engagement with a much more creative mindset, right? Whereby mathematics also applies. If Sinokola says that subsidize X, this will cost you 6 million rand, let's say on financial exclusion whatsoever, right? And you have no last measure to call in private sec. You would then will calculate, okay, 6 million rand makes better sense than me having to militarize the campus with at the cost of whatever, right? And with everything else that happens. So our default then is to be like delineated, because I think there are different defaults. And I think the other default is actually a knee-jerk reaction, which is in and of itself telling. Moving on to my other point. So then, must all ask, where to from here? Because it has been done. What do we do, right? But before I answer that question, my question is, after we send an email saying that, listen, this is what you've done here is the last straw, right? This here is malicious. What could have been done? If somebody says to you, you've done so wrong, right? I think it's a thing of, I don't know, perhaps like you need to have a class in this, like, PhD seminar. You do not rationalize to them what they say you've done wrong, but rather try to understand from their position what is that you've done wrong, and then come with an apology. And if you so believe that, listen, I stand by my actions, you will say exactly just that. I stand by my view, I am not sorry for what I did. And then that is fine, right? But this thing of trying to rationalize to people is like me cheating on you, then I try to rationalize to you why I cheated on you, because when I called you weren't there. Do you get why we're actually not moving forward, right? So what could have been done better? When Senator Collins says that you should not have done this thing, it was like, oh shit, I am sorry, I apologize. It is as simple as that, I apologize. You do not tell me that of the reading of that agreement, I actually can call private security. But then what you're saying is that you're saying fuck you to everything else that has happened. In my reading, this is what, okay, moving on to the last point. My last point, right? I am making my last point. Now, where to from here, right? So going back to the thing of, it's the thing of when you go into an engagement space, right? What do we have in your bag? What are the options that you can explore, and what resources we have? I think then we need to eliminate one particular possibility, right? Because then that will help us with any and future conflicts. We need to eliminate the opportunity or the avenue for us to call in security whenever there's an issue. Because if you do not have that avenue to call in security whenever there's an issue, that makes us much more creative. It allows common sense even to permeate a bit more into the room. And then that's how perhaps we can resolve issues, right? The reason why the protocol on police was developed, it was developed to a protest that happened in Bremner 2014, right? Whereby even the executive acknowledged that perhaps we should not have done that. Had this university been invaded in 2010 by some external force, we will not need a protocol to deal with, let's say, a foreign invasion. Because that is a particular situation whereby you do need to protect the campus, right? And like that's something that you cannot control. So like this is what I'm saying, like we must also move away from this red herring of some extraterritorial invasion in an invasion, and from when issues, legitimate issues are being brought up within a university context, and eventually out of rage and frustration being brought up in a protest mode. And we need to understand that if people protest, what have we done for them not to come to that point whereby they protest? So start with a self-ban and like a moratorium that you will never ever call private sec, right? And then that's when, if you can come to that point whereby you will never ever call private sec, that I think you then giving faith to the processes that are at hand. You're giving faith to Steering Committee, giving faith to IRTC, giving faith to IRTT, and other measures to resolve an issue mediation. So that if you need to call the church people to come and mediate, you'll call the church people to come and mediate, right? Whatsoever. That's my take for now.
Okay. It's you, and then it's you, and then it's Dr. Pican, and then I'll come round to try and close this so that we can talk about what next.
So I think just on the issue of security, I think the institution has created a situation, it's created a situation for themselves. I don't know if you guys have read a song called The Smoke That Calls. It's the idea that states only responds when there's fire. And unfortunately, the institution has created that situation in itself, and that it's only when there's disruptions that there's a response, that there's a need to be able to rapidly respond to that particular issue. And just going back to this idea of understanding that there'll be no more shutdowns, I don't know who Shakville thought that they were speaking for, the entire institution. I don't know if you guys thought that these words are going to cover all students. But as far as I'm concerned, we cannot say that as long as we have issue with fees, as long as fees is going to be going up in 2018 maybe, as long as students still feel discriminated against by the system, as long as all these things are still around, I can't promise that I'm not going to be part of protest action or disruptive action in this institution. And I don't think it's fair. For me, I think I'd be very disingenuous if I would agree. And also I'd be agreeing as one person. Maybe everyone else feels very comfortable, but I feel so uncomfortable agreeing as one person that X hundred or 1,000 students are not gonna wanna take action. Because I think you guys don't understand, I don't know, I think sometimes you guys don't understand the type of violence this institution perpetuates. I still think that we're grappling to understand how suffocating it is. Sometimes when I see some other students that are involved in this, the damage that has been caused, and it's not just no offense. No, students have been damaged. They're exhausted. We're struggling with fatigue, and I think we are like the magnitude, and it would be disingenuous for me to say that there will never be a shutdown or a disruptive process, because I don't know if other people feel like things have changed. I feel like nothing has changed since this, since like the institutional culture hasn't shifted. We call private security, and I think in the other meeting, we then somehow the discussion moved from, okay, so then how do we deal with security in general? As if the university calls private security when students are being raped, as if the institution calls private security when we're being kidnapped. So I also don't like this idea of using those particular security threats as a reason why to call private security when they've only ever called private security when it's to do with politics. We should just be honest to that. And also, maybe it's just me, but I don't think I should be responsible for thinking about mechanisms to provide security for this institution. I'm not paid for it. I don't have the degree for it, and I just think it's putting a lot of strain, because the last chair said that we must all come up with ways to how do we securitize, because I did mention the fact that the biggest reason why I'm against the use of security on this campus is that this is an academic institution. I would think that we boast about having world-renowned researchers. Surely these researchers can come together and think about how do we change this normalization of violence. If it's not going to happen at UCT, where do we think it's going to happen? Number one institution in the continent. I think, yes, it is difficult. It's difficult in a society where, like I say, violence is institutionalized, but we need to start being creative. And I mean management, because they are being paid, because it's their job to think about these things. So personally, I was just thinking it's a lot for you to ask me as a student going through all these other things to also now think about security frameworks to try to fix the solution. All I know is that I can't be here when there's private security. All I know is that an academic institution shouldn't be militarized. That's all I know. And there's nothing, and I even thought that the discussion about compromising would be disingenuous, because I'm unwilling to compromise. It's actually disingenuous for me to think that I can even compromise when it comes to private security. There will never be a time when there's private security. I think security and violence has done enough for our society. And we need to start thinking they need to start for now. Until I get my degree, then maybe I can join. But for now, the people that are employed, people that have these degrees, this world-renowned institution needs to come up with ways and not put onus on first-year, second-year students, who are some of these leaders that sign these agreements. People are second, the first year at the time. People want to come up with security upgrades. It's not going to happen. And I just think the university really needs to take responsibility. And dare I say, if we actually try find a framework, we can actually change society, because this is actually a societal issue as well.
Thank you, Chair, again. I want to indulge you, Chair, again, to perhaps lead us, because, you know, we are going to enter into another stream of things that cannot really be resolved here.
Yeah.
They can only be resolved on the ground, and Price knows that when the ground is fertile, such conversations about whether who has the authority to call private security and all of these things can be engaged. I don't want for us to start distinguishing between what is strike, what is shutdown, whether shutdown is the right response to. I mean, everyone will react differently to the operation that is exempted by the university. The university will never tell us what is the legitimate way of protesting or voicing our pain. That is clear from the beginning. If it means we must shut down the university, we will forever shut down the university in order to bring it to our attention that we don't want to be negotiating in meaningless platforms around these issues to be resolved. But I do propose, Chair, that for the sake of this platform, because there's a lot that lies on this platform beyond just the issue of the security in the university and who has the authority to call security. People's lives are at stake, their academic lives, the institution's credibility to be able to resolve institutional racism is at stake. But beyond more is to be able to show the country at large how we are able to deal with our issues in ways in which are different from how other universities are dealing with today. Today we have CPUT burning down as we speak in Belgium. We have in different universities where it has not been, we have not reached the moment that we are reaching here. And I think a moment to think about, since South Africa is like a crossroad, it's very important for us to have a commitment on this thing. I do not say this because I think I agree with Lex Price or anyone else, but I think that let us use the opportunity to get over this platform. Then other issues that we have, we are going to address them the way in which we are long been addressing them. That is mobilizing society to pressure Lex Price to do the issues that we want to do. There's nothing more. This forum will never resolve all of our issues, but it can resolve the deadlock that we find it. Perhaps paint another phase in the university moving forward. We don't agree on private security. We never agree on private security. That's the point. If it means that that's the understanding in moving forward. When Price calls private security, they must know that they must expect a retaliation from us as students on that private security. There must be no dilly-dallying on why private security is called. Our reaction must not be policed to that, so on and so forth. But for the sake of it, I think that conditions on how we move forward, whether we still have interest in this platform, must be expressed. Not only between students and the management, but also the other stakeholders who are here, because it feels like it is three people talking and there's no sense of, you know, it's like we're going back to the ring again. I don't know. We don't want to be that. Let's be able to move as chair to be able to fight each other, not in a way in which we agree with each other, but in a way in which understands the conditions and the dynamics that we are in the university and the country.
Thank you. The chair wanted to say something and then I will.
Well, I think that I'm one of those that were not party to the agreement. And I find the conversation quite educational for me. I think we have to start from a premise that begins to look at or accepts that protest action is a legitimate form of expression in a democratic society. Actually, as stakeholders here, we're not in the same place in respect of that, because unionized workers have that regulated and clearly articulated under what circumstances is done, and we talk about protection of that form of action. But in respect of students, actually, we do not have an express protection of that form of action. And by the way, you can have protected form of protest action that could result in a shutdown. But I think the language that has characterized the politics of shutdown rings through all the notions about violence and so on and so on. And that is so because we have a piece of the discussion that we have not concluded. So I think that a missing element in this is that we need to agree going forward on what I would refer to in the same way we talk about protected strike, we talk about protected protest action by students. Because when you say there is violence in this institution, there is violence against black students in this institution, there is a sense of suffocation. It gives one a sense of great discomfort because we must create mechanisms to enable those who feel suffocated to be out of that suffocation and bring to the surface those things that are a source of discomfort and alienation and all of that. Maybe the way this is couched there about protocols around security is a negative expression. We need to have protocols around protest action. How is protest action? If we want to go and protest against anything in Milnerton, we will have to go through certain protocols to allow that protest action to happen. So we must create in this institution a permissive environment for protest action to happen for those people that want to have that happen. It's very strange because, I mean, this is a conversation that workers had 20 years ago. And that's how labor relations came about. Now we have issues about, in the wake of Marikana, violence that exploded in the way that it did. And we're having another conversation about where we protect the right of workers to protest, how do we ensure that workers don't die in the middle of the protest? And the recount of abusive experiences that came with having security on campus should wake us up to look at how do we ensure that protest action does not result in that kind of experience for those who participate. So that's the conversation that we must have. We can't pretend that it is not a missing element in this. Whether we have it in the context of the IRTC or we have it as a separate conversation is a matter that we should discuss. But I'm encouraged that by the spirit that says let's see how we can progress this work of the IRTC. But I wouldn't like us to lose the fact that in the absence of a clear sense of how democratic protest action by students is allowed and not suppressed in the institution is developed.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that and for the conversation. I think people have been very clear about what they would agree to be the right thing to do and what not. One of the things that I wanted to allude to is that when we signed this agreement, we were under the impression that if things go wrong, the mediators will be called to ask, where do we go? So I want to remind people around this table that perhaps there are steps that get missed in the heat of the moment, and those steps should never be missed. Not that I'm looking for a job and that we could have been called before private security was called, but there is something to be said about the spirit of saying, before you escalate to calling private security, please engage us so that we know. And maybe in doing that, there could have been a clarification as to whether this is about the workers' strike or about the shutdown, or about this, so that everybody was on the same page as to why there was a need to protect the university. The other thing that I want to say is that there's something in me that says, and I know why now, that didn't come to fruition. If there was a process where those protocols were developed, perhaps we could have been sitting in a different place right now, because that would have engaged exactly as to what is protest action, what should be protected and how. But I mean, that's water under the bridge. But I think it's important to say there was an agreement that was, for me, if for instance there was a stalemate around even formulation of the protocol, it would have been important to call the mediators to say, can you please come and help us so that we can get this thing going? In which case we would have heard that the students are saying no security whatsoever. And then we look at, if that is then the position of the student, what happens when management feels there's a threat looming? How do we deal with that? Because that's what. So I saw this meeting today actually as having to raise questions that would lead to possible answers as to how this thing can be dealt with. And I think many questions have been raised around why did you call private security? What protocols did you use? You know, and all of those questions I think are legitimate in terms of how this process gets be taken forward, in terms of how does the university engage with the students in terms of saying, how are we going to hold this whole thing about when we see there's a threat looming? How do we react to it without messing the relationships that we've built? A trust that is violated is very difficult to restore. And I think it's about thinking about how do we guard the spirit of what was agreed that will help move things forward. I'm also encouraged, and I think we're on the same page here, that the question that was asked was, there has been the difficulty, and how can we move forward? What are the conditions in which this body can move forward? IRTC people can re-engage so that the processes that have been agreed can be taken forward. And I'd like us to move to that position if there is no dissenting voice, but acknowledging that there was also a question, I think it came from this side, that there was a question around when things go wrong, how do we acknowledge the wrong so that we can actually find a space to be able to move forward? So if, for instance, some cry foul that you didn't do correctly, how do we get to that so that we can move forward? But having said that, I would like us to discuss, and I think people are starting to talk about time. We're left with about 10 minutes. What would it take, and I think that was the question, what would it take for the stakeholders around this table to re-engage in order to go forward? Or is that at all possible at this stage? Have we deliberated enough? Given that, I mean, 2 hours to try and discuss this is very limited. I wasn't hoping we're going to have answers to everything, but maybe we can start deliberating on what it will take for people to feel they can re-engage. If what it will take is to have another engagement, that will be, but at least let's at least begin that process of engagement.
You're asking the question at the wrong side. It should be asked at that side. What would they willing to do? Because I mean, like, we've made our tries. If the answers should come from that side,
okay,
and then the question should be, do you find this agreeable?
Okay. So you're wanting to ask the side of management, I presume that's what you're saying, to...
Point of order.
Okay.
This is not a management meeting, this is a TRC meeting. So if I want to respond, I'm saying that it's not a management meeting.
Okay.
This is a TRC meeting.
A steering committee meeting.
Yeah, a steering committee meeting,
yeah.
Namfundo, please can I have Namfundo?
Yes.
Can I please say something?
Oh, so sorry.
No, it's okay. I've just been listening. It's the first time that I'm actually asking to say something, so don't worry.
Okay.
So from what I've heard, it seems to me that we are faced with a situation of having 2 poles to what is two extreme poles. We have at the one end students who are talking in one voice against private security.
Yeah.
And then at the other extreme end, from what I'm hearing, is on the management side, there seems to be justification in one form or another of having private security in some shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
So with these two extremes, I think what needs to happen is there actually needs to be a conversation of how it is that we can see things in the same way. Because this whole entire process, even
Hello? We've lost her.
Can I just go back to the point I was trying to make?
what we are all here about. So I
She doesn't know that we lost her. Tell her to go back to our previous point.
We have lost part of what you said. We heard part of it. Hello, are you there? We've lost her. Yeah, it's gone.
Okay, can I just make my point?
I think the point she was making was that there are two polarities of people standing in this camp and the others saying no private security and management, or for lack of a better word, the other side saying there should be some security. And she was saying that maybe we need to find some ground before we move to the next point, but I didn't.
Chair, may I add that Buli mentioned that there are the students on the other hand, and then there's the management on the other hand. May I also add that after having discussed the issue with my alternate, Edwina Goliath, we also felt very, very strongly that the issue of private security in this institution is a point of no discussion at all. We should not be having a private security institution. Secondly, Chair, I just want to make a point. Going forward again, Dr. Max Price made this point loudly earlier, that the agreement does not in any way give management the right to waive, it does not waive their right to call private security. That's what Dr. Max Price said earlier. And I object to that. I object to that very, very strongly, because it goes back to the point that's not all raised earlier, that there's a technical reading of that clause. That runs the risk of either me or any other constituency as well going by that agreement and reading it in a manner that suits them best. I go back to the point I made earlier, Chair, that as a person who was not involved there, my reading of that clause seems to suggest there was a spirit that led to that clause. But I'm happy with the conversation that took place earlier. Straight point, I want to propose to management that they do not call private security in this institution. That's a concrete proposal to them. And I agree with Tembelile that I can't believe that the people who signed the agreement even thought of having private security institution to draft protocols to call all those things. I can't believe that happened. But again, we're not part of those conversations. But going forward, may I appeal to Dr. Max Price and his team to waive their right to call private security company, private security institution. Because honestly, none of the people who are in management have ever experienced direct experience of how it feels to have a private security institution. Very quickly, Chair, 2015 I was entering my office at the Bremer. I'm a staff member here. I was confronted by private security people. Sandra Klopper came down to bail me. You can phone Sandra and ask her. She will tell you. She bailed me. And the only reason why I was subjected to that kind of treatment, I'm black, I'm African, and I'm male. Do you understand? So the issue of private security is not just a case of, it's not a conversation that we are having here. It's a real issue for some of us here in this institution. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that it's very important that we heard from people who are not necessarily part of the agreement in the same way that Shackle and management work, because even in the SRC representatives, it gets a bit redundant because some of us were part of that process, so we were privy to the conversations that are not reflected in this document. So my request is that now that we know that power staff, other constituencies, SRC as well as Shackville are against the idea or even the mere consideration of having private security on campus, that there's no compromise around that. What are the other constituencies represented in the steering com saying? Because we might as well now be in the mediation session, because it's the same conversation that we've been having had it been the signatories and management alone. And facilitated by people who were very familiar with the process. So with the people, with the not, like, obviously acknowledging the fact that a lot of the people in this room were not part of the conversations that were happening, and by virtue of being in this committee, you are subjected to a document that you didn't participate in any, like, in the formation of, and all of that. I just want to know, like, what's Senate saying, what's council saying, like, what are the deans saying, what are the executive directors saying? Because at this point, in the early start of this conversation, it appeared as though it's only the students that are objecting to the presence of private security. And now we know the past staff as well are in objection. So what's everyone else saying about private security on campus?
I think that would help to get a reflection on that. Can I then get responses to that question? Because I think it will. I did say at the beginning of this meeting that when the agreement was signed, it was signed between management and students. And now we have a meeting with other constituencies. And perhaps it's a good idea to ask the other constituencies to say what they feel about the issue of private security on campus, so that we can then go back to the question of what it will take for people to engage. And I think he was beginning to say that for him, it's about no private security on campus, but we can probably embellish that to say what other things would be required so that people can engage with other processes. Can I please get some responses from Senate and other representation here on their stance on the issue of private security?
So I think that's an important point, to hear some of the other voices at the sort of north end of the table. So I hear Senwabo's comment about private security, and I think I've heard students. I was at the institutional forum where we had the issue of private security was brought up, and our representatives then of the SRC were just terribly upset about the private security. And I think it's a side that I haven't seen because I'm white, and so I acknowledge that. But there was a side to the protest that, as an academic, we saw, that were a lot of staff and students were also traumatized by the disruptions that were going around, because it was very threatening on both sides. And so staff were threatened and students were threatened, and a lot of people are traumatized on campus. There were also several situations where health and safety were severely compromised. I know that down the IDMM, there were disruptors who were coming in, and they were very close to the biosafety facilities where people deal with multi-drug resistant TB, which is potentially a very dangerous situation. And there could have been a disaster if disruptors had come in to those facilities and those pathogens had been let free on everybody, on the protesters. So that's a dangerous situation. There are buildings with lots of chemicals. The building that I'm in is a dangerous building if people get into the wrong place. So we do need to have some way of managing protest when it gets to a position where buildings are invaded and health and safety is violated. So I come from a position of, I think that we make a very positive point about we need to manage protest, and we need to look at it in a positive way, not in a negative way, that there is a right to protest, and how can we manage protest, and so that we don't end up in situations where dangerous situations, where protesters might be infected by multi-drug resistant TB that people are culturing in their cabinets, or chemicals and explosives get let off and the building burns down. I mean, that would be a disaster. And it's the responsibility of the executive to ensure my health and safety. And so I feel quite strongly that I want my health and safety also looked after. And so I think that would be the Senate response, is that we do want somewhere that security, we need to have security of some sort to prevent those situations from happening.
So I'm trying
I'm
trying
not
to
sure-
get to your answer as
So I
in
hear
relation to private security.
So I hear that students who were targeted by private security were badly affected by that. And so I understand a lot of emotion that the idea of private security brings. At the same time, on the other side, there are people who work in the university who need to have their rights also protected. And I'm not sure we need to have the conversation is on how do we protect everybody, the protesters and everybody else working on campus. And private security is one solution, and I'm happy to engage. There might be other solutions, but we need to have the conversation. And we can't, the institutional forum where nobody is prepared to have the conversation. Yeah. And we need to have that conversation. And
if it's in
Solo said he implored us to say that there are these two positions that we need to find a space so that we can move forward. And I think we need to find that space so we can move forward. I don't know if we can resolve it here.
So your position is that
coffee.
We need some security.
Is that you need some security, and there needs to be a discussion of what that security would be?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's any assurance, can I just quickly
hear?
interject? If it's any assurance, I also have no interest in being burnt by a chemical or getting multi-drug resistant TB.
Yeah.
I think that's our general principle. We don't want to be infected by, you know what.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I please get the other?
Yes, Samuel from the Employees Union. I think I need to make a differentiation between past staff and the Employees Union. We're also past staff. So the position of the past forum may not be the same as the past staff. Coming from the same point as the Gilling gave, during the 2016 protests, we were badly traumatized. On the past forum, we were, if you look at we did not suffer any deaths like Wits University did, where fire extinguishers were let off in our faces, where we were threatened with knock carries and sticks, where fire alarm were set off in our building, and we had to evacuate our offices, where our doors were banged in, and we were asked to leave when we were sitting huddled with fear. So when we bring up when we contextualize the security on campus, we need to contextualize that in the instance where we say, would the abused wife support her abusive husband?
What do you say?
Will the abused wife support her abusive husband? In other words, let's contextualize it further. Will the rapee support her rapist?
It's also what you're saying.
I'm very much aware that we're skating on thin ice with relation to time, and I didn't want to stop people, but can I just ask people to just be succinct and clear and to the point?
As much as we abhor the security on campus, we also need to protect ourselves. And we need protection. The university management has not protected the past staff in our buildings. We were threatened. We brought that up to management's attention. Nothing was done. So in the context of protection, very similar to what our dear professor has said there, we need protection for ourselves. Some kind of protection.
Some kind of protection. So it's almost like similar to
Correct.
Your point. Can I have any other constituencies? No, I'm still going on.
I'll just say.
Or you are a constituency. Go ahead.
Just quoting they can go first.
Okay, sure. I was moving this direction.
Alumni, we do not support private security on campus.
Okay.
Can I go?
Yeah.
The Academics Union. Firstly, it's a bit unfair to ask the question that has been posed because it's being asked in the context still of the agreement. So there is a bit of unfairness in the Secondly, and to answer that question, it's great that some constituencies that have spoken represent.
Speak up.
I am speaking up.
Sorry, but I can't hear.
It is fine that some representatives of other constituencies have a rather uniform constituency. We don't have in the academics union a single view. When I say we, I may have one view, but the vast majority of the members that we represent have a variety of views about private security and about the police. But one thing that I can safely say most of our members have about either police or private security is that the first port of call when there are issues on campus ought not to be the calling of either the police or private security. Even if either is called in any instance, once they leave, the issues will remain unresolved. We have members, to conclude, we have members who would express the same view that the EU has, some members of the EU have said that they felt, and the Senate representative, they felt that they were not protected, they were not given protection. And we have members who would argue very strongly along the same lines that students in general have argued that there should never be a private security on campus. On police, there is also a very strong view that if they are to be on campus, there has to be a protocol. And again, the views are varied. So I cannot answer that question as if there is a uniform view about it. But I will still insist, despite Dr. Price nodding his head, I don't know why that was the case, that there is a little bit of unfairness to the question, I think.
Well, I think the question also, just to explain that, for me, it was not necessarily locating it within the spirit of that agreement, but to the conversations that we've had right now.
Thank you. No, I understand.
You know, just to say we've had this conversation.
Okay.
What are people's feeling having had what they've had?
And I'm entitled to misunderstand.
And also, I'm hoping that people are not necessarily, I mean, I know that you've got a constituency, but I'm also aware that the constituency might have diverse views.
They do.
Because you can't have a constituency of 100 people with everybody agreeing one way or another.
Yeah,
so you may have a view and others may have a different view.
I do indeed.
Okay. So can we have another constituency?
Sure. I think it's, I'm speaking for HODs, but HODs indirectly represent academic staff. And academic staff are obviously a complicated element of UCT. There's no real consistency in many things that people will say. You probably should never expect that of a group of academic staff. But I think everybody will agree that the academics strongly feel that we are here for teaching and learning, for research and for our students. This is primarily why the academics are here. And transformation at UCT, how academics get involved with transformation is a complex thing. There are some who have engaged strongly with it and some who have not engaged as much. And I can't just give you one view on where they stand and how it's all panning out over time. But I think it is clear that academic staff, especially heads of departments, are very concerned about disruptions at the university, security at the university, because all of these issues are going to impact on teaching and learning at the institution. So we are very worried about this, but we want to be supportive of this IRTC process, and that's quite clear that this is something that could lead us to a better future at the institution. And there's no single view about this, but I've heard lots of concerns from people about things that could go wrong at the institution this year, and I think we really need to deal with this. We need to get on with the IRTC process.
I think the question was, what's your view on the private security?
My view on the private security was embedded in that answer, that there are concerns about not just private security, but there are concerns with the issues that have led to private security, with the responses to private security, because all of these concerns are concerns that impact on teaching and learning.
Okay. Thank you. There's you and then there's you.
All right.
I just want to call clarity on what was said from the employees union, the analogy of a rapee and a rapist. I think, we have rape survivors, part of my constituency, probably watching, and I think that was a very inappropriate analogy. I think it wasn't a very sensitive, it was a very insensitive thing to say. And I just like an apology of that, because I don't know, maybe I'm taking it too personally, but you can't equate. I just think in the whole guise of gender-based violence, particularly sexual violence, I think this isn't really the platform we should be throwing out things like that, particularly to do with sexual violence, considering that a lot of people are watching and a lot of students, part of these constituent organizations, are rape survivors. That's just something I'm currently feeling very uncomfortable about that.
Mm-hmm. Can I please ask to
apologized on that note, if that satisfies the constituency of the information.
Okay. Thank you for the apology.
Chair, I think we need to move in a certain direction. I think also to just stick to private security as a blanket approach might miss the analysis here. In the sense that, for example, currently there's huge issues about safety on campus. Right? Many people are talking about there's been many incidents that are happening on campus that warrants the university to step up security of students on campus. Also the university, for example, the SRC, just a very quick example, is planning to have an event in a few weeks' time. We will need security there. And it may be that CPS won't be adequate to be the people to do that job. Then the question becomes, what's then the solution to such situations? What I think for me is we need to be very clear on this thing, that there is a certain kind of security that comes on campus. When people talk about private security, there's a certain kind of private security that people are talking about. Right? And maybe that the two extremes are failing to meet, because there's that. Because private security has been around the city for ever. Every time there's events, there's other people that come into campus and do that thing. We have not had the problem, but there's a certain kind of private security that we had to have the problem. And I would then say that, can we then discuss that? For example, paramilitary private security, which is Mr. Scholar coming on campus, I think is a no-no. It's a complete no-no. It's what has been happening. What I think management must be able to do, because, I mean, I don't think there's anyone here who disagrees with the safety, blah, 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 or, I mean, it's not what I said, we don't want to also endanger ourselves, the students, I don't think anyone wants to endanger themselves. But I think that management must put forward a proposal to us that is more creative than what has been happening. But I do want to caution us against the blanket word of private security, because we are going to reach a deadlock. That is unavoidable. Senate would not want to say that their staff are just, the HODs clearly don't want to say it out, but you can clearly see what they say by the academic. They want to be protected. Let us talk, I think then we need, management must come to us and talk about what other ways, creative ways of protecting the university, all of it, blah, 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 in whatever way. But what is clear, I mean, many people will not want to say it out, but it's very clear implicitly, paramilitary, private, Mr. Scholar, the likes, are not welcome on campus, because there's a certain kind of intimidation and a certain atmosphere they create. But I don't think that we would completely say that any kind of security on campus is unwarranted, because then we're going to get into ourselves in other issues that we don't want. Because we do know that CPS is not equipped to do certain things that the university will have to deal with at the end of the day. So I think maybe if we move the discussion in that direction, we might be able to find some middle ground.
Sure.
So, the Chair, I have to apologize. I have to leave soon because I've got responsibility to pick up kids from school. Lindy Kushla and I don't always agree, but this time I agree completely with you. I think that there should be no place for paramilitary operations like Peter Scholar, and I think that we should reach an agreement on that. I think the broader issue of security must be discussed in the context of what the chairperson raised. That there's no point in having it in isolation, because then it becomes polarized, you know, and as if we're on opposite sides, when in reality there's a lot of common ground. So it's got to be a protocol around issues of protests and shutdowns, demonstrations, disruptions, as opposed to protocol on security or police, because that's a means to an end. That's not an end in and of itself. But on the use of Vita Scholar on campus, I think that we should take a decision that in principle they should not be allowed onto our campus, and we should find other ways of dealing with issues around protests and disruptions, even if a threat of a shutdown
is looming. Okay. Can I?
What? Yeah, before you give over to Ms. Way's response, just so that like the Uhla's argument is not misconstrued in any disingenuous way, right? Lulu was talking about the point of safety, that if you've got a massive event, if you've got a concert and whatnot, I would like to believe that these things are not things that are now going to happen in 2016 or only started happening in 2015. These are events and things that have been happening prior, right? Whereby we even brought signal from the other side. So therefore, even the point of we now need to develop a creative policy, I would like to believe that such a policy already does exist. Otherwise, it will be pure recklessness. So therefore, but then my worry is this, that we will develop a creative policy with, we'll get speechwriters, write it in nice flowery language, but the policy is to police protest rather than address the safety, rather than security, the safety issues that the negotiator is talking about, right? The same way that like CPS is not equipped, if the president is coming, CPS may not be equipped for that. CPS is not equipped for rape, it's not equipped for kidnapping, but somehow we find that, right, when those things are happening. Only then when they're on protest, we say, oh, actually they're not equipped. So like the safety argument then is not even something that should be discussed within the TRC, really. I will not like to be called to a meeting whereby it is proposed, Sina, what do you think of this safety protocol? These are things that you're supposed to be doing to begin with. It's part of your day job, to protect your campus, secure it, since it is not a fenced campus, right? And like, think of it this way. If it wasn't 2015 whereby there were no protest, and we had these issues of kidnappings, events, whatnot, you'll be thinking of all those things, Do not with protest at the back of your mind. That's one thing. So, whenever that proposal comes up, haven't believed that it is in the proposal of the sort. It not be disingenuous to be subtly to police protest. And secondly, then can you also we ask the question, must always ask this question, we've asked this question as well. To move on forward, right? Can we also get the responses to what people are proposing, and then whether we find that agreeable?
Okay. Yeah.
I think also we must be able to agree that we are in a different moment than usual moments in the university. So at some point we don't also appreciate the fact that before we address issues there must be conflict in the university. I don't think that everyone celebrates the fact that there must be a conflict, shutdown, everything. So the point of talking about removing Vita Scholar must also be replaced about the way in which we can have a meaningful engagement that does not derail or ignore the agency of the moment, but also does not become superficial. It's able to resolve the problems which are raised by students or people in the university. Because we don't want to suggest that the university must not bring private security, but there is no other mechanisms of dealing with the conflict at hand. And that moves away from taking us to court, because this is what usually the mechanism that the university uses is takes us to court, it brings private security, it brings police, then it does those propaganda and paint us as hooligans and all of these things. So in the absence of that bringing Vita Scholar, there must be a real substantive way of engaging with the issues at a glance, so that we don't find ourselves shutting down. University does not find ourselves having to respond to the shutdown. But of course, then there must be a way, even if when we don't find ourselves, what are the reasonable things that the university can do? What also the reasonable things that students can do in life? So that we have some sense of common ground, so that when we go back and say, okay, you have brought this common principle, therefore the conversation is no longer happening between us. So that it does not just become, okay, we'll remove Vita Scholar, but what is the platform in which we engage in that speaks and addresses the issues?
Can I just, because I know that people are going to start worrying about time, Russell has already indicated that he's going to go shortly because he's got to pick kids from school. We are at nearly 5:30. We've gone half an hour over, and maybe I should be asking for permission to extend this meeting to a particular time, and so that we know we've got a limitation, otherwise it will just go on and on and on. So are people able or willing to stick around, apart from those who need to go urgently, until we can try and wrap up at least by 6 o'clock? Is that agreeable?
At least or at most?
At most. Sorry, English is not my first language.
I can't stay till 6.
Okay. So
I've also been hoping that we would have wrapped already.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I think
so we also, the person letting us out is leaving at 6, so I'm not sure then if
no, we will.
Else in terms of our equipment.
Okay. Let's.
I also can't stay.
What is your limitation? Time limitation? 15 minutes. Can we add another 15 minutes just to try and wrap up?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
10.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yes,
yes, that's what I want to do.
Attention please, I'm closing in 30 minutes at 6 p.m. Please move through the Sutton, so terrace will close in 20 minutes. Thank you.
In 15 minutes we close. So I think there's been a call for, can we hear what, and I think the spirit is really what can be done to avoid the situation.
So I would like to.
What do you want to propose?
Yeah, I would like to propose. I think we've heard two things. That the spirit of engagement first needs to be adhered to at all times. And I think that that's the first principle. But we've also heard the principle that if we get stuck, there needs to be some form of protection. And so the proposal that I want to put forward is if we do get to that moment, that we would first, I think the IRTC may be a good place to have all the stakeholders, but to get everybody practically in the room when you need to is going to be difficult. So we thought about the RRTT as a possible that includes the SRC as well as Shackville to address the issue and specifically the question of protection there. But with respect to protection, my suggestion would be that if we say we do not want a paramilitary type of, specifically the Vita Solar type, that we consult with CIRA. CIRA is the regulatory authority of private security, of the security industry. To find a private security that is vetted by CIRA, and that we include the training of that company members in terms of how they should be engaging with our community whilst they are being deployed on campus.
May I add something? I think that Professor Ferris's comment, I'm just worried that it'll be interpreted as saying that somehow we're committed to deploying private security. And I don't think that's what she's saying. So I just want to shape it. We've always, and I must say, I think our track record this year shows, and last year in fact, that we negotiate and we try to deal face to face with the issues, and that for us, private security is the last resort. And nothing would change with that. We also have a protocol that says when there is an incident which might be unexpected, that we first go and engage. One of the executive members goes to engage. That's part of our protocol, and we're making it explicit here in case people don't know, before we call private security. Meaning before we call private security or police onto the space. I also think we can say, and I don't know if this is of comfort to others, but that there's been a shift in our attitude to private security vis-a-vis police. In the past, our protocol still says, and we have to go to council to change it, but our protocol still says that we must call private security before we use the police. And the reason we used to do that was because there was a view that we could somehow hold private security to account. They were responsible to us, whereas the police we have no control over. But the experience of many people is that actually it's very hard to hold private security to account in the heat of the moment. And so we propose reversing that so that we call the police and SAPS and public order first if we need to, and the private security is really called if either the police aren't available, but they often aren't because often it's happening on 4 campuses at the same time, or if the police say that we must have private security. If we end up needing private security as a last resort, that we should not use the paramilitary type. We should use private security that is approved in various ways, but also who have been trained, and this requires prior training, by peace monitors. Because we think that, because they tell us, we've been meeting with them and they tell us that they've had success in this regard, and that it can change the way that private security, when they are needed, function. I think that we probably will not get agreement. We will not agree, let me say, I will not agree while I'm Vice Chancellor to forego the right altogether to call private security if it's necessary. We cannot anticipate all the situations, and I think that's what I was hearing from Linda quickly was an acknowledgement of that. In other words, not just for the events of the sports events and the assembly but we have to look down the road, and we do not know what might happen. But a few weeks ago we found tires on the campus which were clearly there because there was an intention to burn something. So when we don't know who it came from, and we're not pointing fingers at anyone in particular. We don't know if it was workers or unions or students or people from off the campus. But it gave us a fright. We found one set of tires, and we didn't know if we'd found them all because there could have been others, so we could remove those tires. But we, on that night, called in as a standby private security because we were worried that there might be an arson attack. We had no one to negotiate with or to call and say, is there something on the go? So there are times when we need to have, but my point is that that's always only on standby, and we will not bring them onto campus without going through all of these other processes, including, if possible, engaging with the RRTT, which has been our problem-solving structure and has generally worked well, to say, do you know about this? Is there a problem? Help us understand this. But we can't give up that right. I think what I heard Masinkmali say, very, in my view, constructively earlier, was that we may not get agreement on this question of shall we forgo the right or not. But there's much more at stake here. I think we've built up a lot of trust over the year. I think we have a real interest in having the IRTC, and I think we've perhaps got enough common ground to say, with what I've said, what Prof. Ferris has said, can we then agree that we reconvene the steering committee to appoint the commissioners? Do we have enough? So we're shifting our view on police versus private security. We're shifting our view on paramilitary. We're looking at ways of ensuring that remains a last resort, and we go through all the steps before calling them. We're using the peacekeepers. With all of that, recognizing that we are not going to give up the right to call private security if we need it, to protect buildings, to protect people, can we move forward on that basis to reconvene the steering committee?
I think the question was what is offered, and you've articulated what you're offering, and I think that then the response from me is, yeah, I just want to hear whether that is acceptable.
Everyone will give their personal view. I'll rather give mine. If I tell you I perceive an arson attack, I call the fire brigade.
So
people with water to take off fire, right? I do not call the police. If I believe that I'm going to be personally assaulted, I'll call the police to protect my body. But anyway, so this is the thing, right? Again, this is, as Ilya said, what could have been done after there was a fallout? An apology could have surfaced, not an acknowledgement that did not give you a courtesy of a call. Perhaps I missed it, right? But I'm still yet to like, perhaps it's going to come in the mail, that apology of the things that have, of the things that brought us to this table thus far. Secondly, right, going back to this thing of creative, I mean, like Mascola said it beautifully, right? What if you were to remove it, a scholar, it creates then a vacuum of what happens when you need dialogue, and then how do you engage around that, right? I think there's so many things that can happen before private security is called. We've got like peacekeepers, we've got external people, we've got the mediation, there's engagement, blah, blah, blah. If, for example, there's a shutdown, let's say of, the jammy stuff, right? And management, obviously, the first step is to on the tick boxes. So box 1, go, send someone to engage. If that doesn't work, if the engagement doesn't work, by 12 o'clock, okay, now go to box 2. Let's call in the peacekeepers. Box 3, if that doesn't work, right? At some point in time, something will have to shift. You don't have to go to box 5, that is called private sake. If need be that you need to engage up until midnight, that's something that we have done before. We had 13-hour-long conversations, and then we reach a resolution. That's something that you do. If you keep that principle, I tell you now, right, something will give. Because like what? Humans are not rigid. But the moment as again, you reserve that particular right? Yeah.
Attention, please.
So
Closing in 20 minutes
that's
at
my
6
personal
p.m.
view on the matter.
Please come to the lounge desk now. Please ensure to take all your close conversations with you when you leave the library. Thank you.
Well, parliamentary no. Ideally, and this is what an academic space should be, you need to be creative and engaged, as we are a research institution. But quite frankly, a security of any kind to respond as a response to any issue is a no-no for me. And this other thing, I must also say this, because I think management doesn't appreciate this. To get a meeting with you is the most easiest thing to do in life. Literally, I send an email, Dr. Brown's can I meet you tomorrow? You say, yeah, sure, what time? That's the most easiest thing. Getting them to act is the other thing.
Yeah. There's a hand here and a hand here, and I need to round it up.
I'd like them to respond to what I'm going to say when they intervene. I just want to state as a matter of fact that Council is the custodian in law of this institution on behalf of the people of the country. as part of that responsibility includes safety, welfare, and all of that of people, assets, and everything that goes with it in the institution. And trust that responsibility to the executive leadership under the Vice Chancellor. So when somebody is injured or killed on campus, under whatever circumstances, the Vice Chancellor of this institution has to account as to what happened and what he did or didn't do to make sure that that doesn't happen. I just want to make that point that that the conversation must take into account that there's limit to what can or cannot be done. But it must be located, whatever decision is taken, I think, and I think this is what people generally have been saying, must be located within a framework that makes for a university that accepts, encourages, and allows free protest action within the framework that is in line with our democratic ethos.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I think a lot of people know, as a disclaimer, right, I've got neurodivergency X, so my processing is not as amazing as everybody else, and that's why I ask, because I haven't made any decision very rash. I think about everything that I've ever said or said, something that I've thought about, and I just think that I personally can't give a straight answer now. I just want to go home and actually process personally everything that's happened, because it's happened in a process. I just like to think about what it then means, because I don't have the answer right now. Maybe it's also because it's so late and my brain is shut down, but I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I just think that I personally would appreciate to be given time to just process everything that's happened. Perhaps even go back, watch this again and just process. And then come back to this idea of, but for me, the reason why I immediately retracted was just the idea of, as long as there's private security, I can't be here. And I see private security is gone, so, but can we actually just, I'd like to go home and just think about it, process it, and then see where that
lands.
Yeah, I think can be moves in that direction. But when I check, I don't think we are far apart from each other.
I don't think so.
I do think that we agree. We're not that far apart. I think we agree on the process that we need to engage before anything happens. But I'd like to caution whenever we see one thing. Maybe it's also going to come in other discussions. But I would like to caution when question private security, it's immediately assumed as an endorsement for police. I intuitively would still not trust police coming into campus, because for the same reason that private security, as the chair of council said, anything that happens on campus must be held accountable. Police, as we've done before, when they come on campus and they do anything, it's simply defend to say, but I'm not trust the police. Even though we have our problems with the private security, but I don't think, maybe, but you can say, but for me, personally, I still would like to prefer police being the last resort. Even if we have private security as the last resort, police being the last
other way around.
They report to. I mean, the thing with police is that I cannot hold you accountable for anything. Once the police come on campus, you completely absolve yourself of anything that they do. They also completely absolve themselves. They report to razzmatazz and no one else. But I do think that when I will not that, and I would agree, maybe let's do a secular. Each constituency writes through email their response to.
Was there any other hand? If somebody has to go, can I just give to the last hand and then I'm going to round it up? 1, 2, and then we're finished. Very
I also
brief.
agree, sorry, Chair, I also agree in principle with Utembelihle of needing more time to
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
But I do have a comment on behalf of the SRC. I think we're agreeing also, no, we don't want police, we don't want private security.
Yeah.
I think we're speaking specifically about protests. And when we speak about security, that includes issues of safety for students and so on and so forth. But I think specifically in the context of protest, we endorse a peacekeeping measure, not a policing measure. Because another problem with the policing measure is that it intimidates. It disencourages people from participating in protest. It disencourages your freedom of speech. So we want a peacekeeping measure, not police.
So I'm just, the Vice Chancellor asked whether we could consider reconvening to appoint the commissioners to the IRTC. And I was wondering if we've got to a point where we could agree to meet again, maybe finalise this discussion. And then if we can finalise it, move on to making progress on the appointment of the commissioners.
When that we solved through the round robin that we proposed, so when
What round
people
robin?
send the emails with the response, they can then
Okay.
also say
So
that.
you were
So
suggesting.
If you say, I agree, I propose this meeting. If you disagree, say, I disagree, let's not meet. But it can be done through that round robin.
Okay, so think and then decide.
Yeah.
No, I didn't
I'm not
understand
sure.
that. Just for clarity, Linda Kuchler, are you, what is going to be the subject of the round robin as you envisage it?
As a response, right, a proper response to your proposal that you guys have just made now.
Okay.
And then also then to answer the question that Prof is asking when I'm going to meet again. So
Well,
part of the email that we sent would also be a proposal that can then, if we agree, we say agree, can we meet on this date? If we say we disagree, we say we disagree, can we not meet forever or can we meet on this date? But I don't think that it would be wise now to discuss meeting times.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I hope it works. I'm probably not quite so optimistic that it can happen in a round robin, but if it can, that'd be great.
Us, we respond to IRTC emails, Chair, so you
You-
can
you
trust
do,
us.
you do, okay.
We give
I know,
lengthy
I know.
essays, Chair.
So can I have clarity? Can I have clarity that what is being proposed is that management, for lack of a better word, puts together what they propose as a way to go forward? The kinds of things that you've said. We will
Okay.
not call private security before we X, Y, and Z.
Right.
We will da 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 da.
Right.
That gets circulated in the manner that you had framed it to everyone who is here, and people will then say, yes, we agree. And then that will be a point of then, in saying that, because the question was, what would it take for this constituency to re-engage?
Yeah. So
It will take an agreement
Yeah.
to what is being proposed.
So I heard Linda Kuchler suggest two answers to the question, and I think it's really useful.
Yeah,
Many people will say, I don't agree, but it's good enough for us to have another meeting,
yeah,
to proceed.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you may say, I agree with this. Or
Yeah.
You may say, I don't agree, but I still think we should now reconvene the steering committee.
exactly.
This is a step forward.
exactly.
Or they may say, I don't agree, and we're so far apart that we can't meet.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
those are actually three
Yeah.
slightly different things.
Yeah.
That's why he's combining the two.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you would answer to those questions, and then that will be the basis on which to go forward.
Just one amendment, Chair. You said to everybody who's present, I think
No.
to the whole steering committee.
Yes.
Yeah. I meant
Attention.
by insinuation, the people who are not here would have been present. Can I, there's another hand. I know, just one last hand.
Access to the space after the library is closed. You can enter from the Hlanganani Plaza. Thank
Okay.
you.
So my understanding is that management's going to come back with their proposal, but it's going to be with a definition of what private security we're now calling, because it's not the paramilitary private security we're talking about.
You're going to try explain, yeah.
Yeah. Can I
We have to find out if they exist.
therefore just thank everyone for participation and say, from where I'm sitting, I actually do believe that you're not as far apart as when we started, but it's about how you move forward that will determine the way forward and how people respond. Eh? What? Never mind.
Close your meeting.
No, don't mind. Okay, thank you.